So in the second video, we're going to go more into how you actually do a job analysis. So we have to think about what kind of information we need to collect. A lot of you who will do a job analysis in your future work or even in the jobs that you have right now, you may actually already have information about jobs that are part of your organization. So this is probably going to be job descriptions for the jobs that already exist, which will include job titles, the major duties of those jobs, the task dimensions of those jobs, and workflow information. How are they related to other jobs and the kind of work that you do in that organization? If you are in like a startup that doesn't have job descriptions yet, or if you're creating new jobs or job families that don't exist yet in your organization, you may not actually have a lot of information to review, in which case everything that you're collecting is completely brand new to create these job descriptions for these new jobs. Once you review the information you already have, you want to collect enough information to identify, define, and describe a job. So you're going to have to collect job data. And remember, your level of analysis, what I just mentioned in the last video, really matters here. If you have a broader level of analysis, the kind of detail that you need for the tasks that are part of jobs may be less descriptive, maybe much broader than if you were going by, for example, a position where you have specific tasks and you want to define one position from another because that's the way you're going to set up your compensation system. So you're going to collect a lot of job data, things like job titles, so that's positions, departments, which departments can also be helpful for figuring out job families sometimes as well. The number of people who hold that job, because that will tell you how many differences or how many different people you may need to talk to about what those jobs are like so that you can get a lot of different information. And then whether that job is exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act overtime regulations that we learned about in Chapter 17. So does this person or this job, can they earn overtime or do they not earn overtime if they work over 40 hours a week? So our job content data will involve elemental tasks or units of work with an emphasis on the purpose of each task. So for all of these positions, for example, or whatever job data we're going to collect, if it's even just at the job level, we need to figure out what the tasks are that people are doing because the tasks are what make the job similar or different to other jobs. But we also want to figure out the purpose of each task. Sometimes that's just to get a sense of what this job does and the workflow, how they contribute to the work that the organization does, part of that workflow information we have. But sometimes what will happen is when you're making changes based on your job analysis, you'll notice that the purpose of a task may not make sense within a certain person's job, but it may make sense in another job. And so you may actually move a task to a different job or consolidate the task from two jobs into one based on the purpose of each task. So that can help you figure that out once you understand why someone is doing a specific task as part of their job. Why is it in their job description to do that? You also want to collect employee data. So you might have a position analysis questionnaire. If you go to the textbook, it has some really good examples of questions from this questionnaire. This questionnaire is written, it's really long. I think it's 149 questions if I recall from the book, but it's also written at a much higher level than typical job materials are. And so sometimes when you use the PAQ, depending on who you're using it with, if you're in HR, you might actually have to help people go through that questionnaire, which will take more time. So you might have to consider that in whether you're going to use something like a PAQ. The other thing is the PAQ is proprietary, which means that your organization would have to pay for it if they wanted to use it. You can also collect information from employees about their interactions, which is the knowledge and behaviors that are involved in their work. And there's really two kinds of interactions that we're looking at. The first is transactional or routine interactions. These are things that you might have standard operating procedures for that are pretty easy to observe, that someone can easily describe as part of their job. And then another kind is tacit, and these are more complex interactions or tasks. And tacit usually requires some kind of background knowledge or experience in order to learn how to do it. And it may not always be obvious, even from observations, that people are using tacit interactions to do their work. Because again, because they have to have that background knowledge, and experience, that they're already coming in with something to be able to do that. It is believed that tacit interactions are much more valuable to an organization than transactional, because it's much harder to replace an employee who has tacit interactions because of that background knowledge and experience that they need, than it is someone who does transactional interactions, where what they do for their job could literally be written down in standard operating procedures and then just given to a new employee to do. We also have to recall, and this is why I have chapter 17 before we start getting into job analysis and how to create a compensation system. We have to consider the laws that we have to abide by when we're writing, when we're doing a job analysis and writing job descriptions. So one of the goals of a job analysis will be to figure out the essential elements of a job. So what are the tasks that a job has to do, because that's part of that specific job. That's also sometimes where having the explanation of why a certain task is performed as part of a job is really helpful. And we have to have this because the Americans with Disabilities Act requires that employers make reasonable accommodations for job applicants to be able to do those essential elements. If a job applicant can't do those essential elements of a job with, even with reasonable accommodations, then a potential employer does not have to consider them for the job, because they can't even do like the basic tasks that are part of that job. So here's where I just want to get into the level of analysis, because I think the rest of the chapter really is based on what level of analysis you're doing your job analysis at. Are you kind of doing it at the job family level? Are you doing it at the job level, at the position level? The level of job analysis or analysis for your the jobs that you're looking at influences whether work looks similar or different. If you have a broader job analysis, say you're doing it within job families instead of specific positions, then it'll look like more jobs are similar to each other, which means that you're probably going to be paying similarly across all these different jobs or the positions that are within each of these job families. However, if you drill down a little bit more to the job or position level, it's more likely you'll see the differences across these different jobs or positions, and then you can differ your pay more. It does require more extensive data in your job analysis, but it does mean that you can justify pay differences in a much more nuanced way, because you have more data to describe the differences in the tasks that different positions and jobs do. Using broader generic descriptions is actually becoming much more common in organizations, because it can increase the flexibility that employees have in the tasks that they do as part of their job. This is really important for organizations that have a lot of knowledge workers, where you may be using information that you learned, for example, in your college degree program, in different ways in your job, and not all of those ways can be described before you take on the job. You might have projects where people have never done a certain task before, and you have to figure out how to do that based on some kind of tacit interaction you have with the knowledge and experience that you've had before. So this flexibility can be really useful. But I want to caution you in always using broad generic descriptions in an organization, because it's easier, because sometimes your compensation strategy is going to be motivating employees through constant promotions and pay increases. And if you use a broad generic description, because a lot of different positions or jobs are going to look quite similar, people may not have as many opportunities for promotion, because you won't have as many levels within your organizational hierarchy if your job analysis is at a much broader level, or there won't be as many pay differences across those different jobs and positions, in which case people aren't getting pay increases over time, even if they're actually getting promoted to slightly different positions or jobs. So usually the kinds of methods that we use for collecting information are interviewing job holders and their supervisors, and that there might be multiple job holders who hold a specific job. Then we should interview many of them, not just one or two. We can observe people at work and doing their jobs. This is much easier when people have more transactional interactions in their job. Tacit may be harder to see, so we may have to do more interviews or follow-ups and questionnaires with them. We can also use quantitative methods, and the one that our book really focuses on is quantitative job analysis, where we essentially create surveys with very specific, nuanced tasks. And we ask employees, do you do this task as part of your job at all? And then how much time do you spend doing it? This gives us really good data that we can use with like software that can analyze what kinds of what kinds of tasks are part of people's jobs and how often they do them. But because you're getting such nuanced data, you can also have lots of differences across job holders within the same position or same job, who either do their job differently, perceive it differently, or just filled out the questionnaire differently, in which case you have to figure out what you're going to do with those discrepancies. In this quantitative job analysis, we can divide up the tasks into 5 groups that are related to the knowledge that you need to do the job, accountability. So how much responsibility do you have in that job for either people or projects or tasks? What kind of reasoning are you using to do the job? How much communication do you have with different kinds of people, either within the organization or outside of the organization as part of that job? And what are your working conditions? And then our book also describes knowledge can be broken down, especially for knowledge workers, into even subcategories. So you can look at what those subcategories look like to see what kinds of things are organizations paying more for in terms of knowledge as well.